the opportunity to discuss some important topics this evening. I also want to thank our tech group for helping us to do our first hybrid meeting for the year, so that's very exciting. We have two presenters here tonight that are going to jump in and launch our discussion. Oh. We have two presenters joining us tonight, Chris Pagliuco and Peter Nye. They are both social studies coordinators. I'm going to call them up here. Peter and Chris, you want to come up? And we have for you a really important presentation on how we approach topics in history and how we handle discussions that come up as part of historical topics. I'm going to move to an alternate seat. Welcome, Chris, and welcome.
So first, let me start by saying that this inquiry is extremely welcome. It has sparked great discussion within our department over the last couple of department meetings, and we've had a lot of fun talking about it, especially at this juncture in our history. It's a great opportunity for us to share our life's work, and so, you know, any of you that would want to have a discussion with us individually after this, we would certainly welcome that also. So there are two goals tonight. There are two goals tonight that I shared with Gail, and you know, I had offered for her to share with you also. One is to see that there isn't a single board member who would fear any topic being introduced into our high school's social studies classes. And the second one goes hand in hand with that, and that is that, you know, somehow I offer you through Zoom and somewhat in person the sense that you can trust us with those topics. So I think the more that we can instill that in you tonight as we go through kind of a list of topics that you requested, we hope that those two things, you know, hand in hand would make you enthusiastic about the education that your children are getting at in the Madison Public Schools.
Okay, so I'm going to be beginning the presentation because I'm the K coordinator, and we're going to start with kindergarten. And before we get to that, I just wanted to mention that this curriculum was written as the result of new social studies standards developed at the national and the state level that in around the year 2013, as you can see. And those standards represented a change in focus in the teaching of social studies from really sort of the classic sequential, teacher-centered, concrete, single narrative type of instruction that I think a lot of us recall from when we were in grade school, to a more conceptual focus that emphasizes student inquiry and the application of historical knowledge to our present day lives. So I think that a lot of those features were already in the social studies classrooms in Madison, but now it was sort of being codified in our curriculum. So with that in mind, hopefully that you'll see these four dimensions that you see on the screen. Hopefully you'll recognize some of those dimensions as Pete and I walk you through the curriculum. As you can see, I'll just read off briefly: developing questions and planning investigations, gathering and evaluating and using evidence, applying disciplinary concepts and tools, including context, historical significance, making connections between time periods, and working collaboratively and communicating conclusions. So social studies instruction in the Madison Public Schools is largely divided into three parts: grades K through 2, grades 3 through 8, and grades 9 through 12. And I'm going to be presenting the first two parts, and then Pete's going to take over. So you can see through these unit titles in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade that we have our youngest learners, and we're trying to increase the borders of their world. And that really begins just with the four walls of their classroom, and then it gradually increases to their school, and then eventually their town. So these units, they include abstract skills such as map reading, and concepts such as what makes a good rule or law. But it also has more simple and tangible questions such as what is a highway, a route, and a country road? We're just trying to get our youngest learners to understand the world around them. A lot of the buildings in town, like what do those buildings mean? The town green, for instance. In grade 3, this approach, the study of social studies really increases in complexity. And we've developed this approach in grades 3 through 8 as a structure for which teachers can teach social studies through. In the beginning, it's very tangible in the classroom. So for instance, history as storytellers. And what we do is we have the kids create little paddles with icons representing these 4 jobs of a historian. So with history as storytellers, we have a book, and we're simply trying to answer the question, what happened? So that then we can dive in much further at a more complex level. Then we move on to history as mind reader. This is about alternate perspectives. We're trying to understand what were they thinking. That symbol is a silhouette of a person, because we're trying to get in their head. We proceed to probably the most difficult one, which is history as investigator, represented by a magnifying glass, because we're trying to get clues and investigate the circumstances which things happen. And we're trying to answer the question, why did it happen then at that time and there in that place? That's very challenging for our youngest learners in grades 3, 4, and 5, and gradually the kids get better at it as they have more world knowledge and history knowledge. And finally, we go to history as judge, where the kids can express what their opinion is about that material. And really, they can have any opinion just so long as it's supported by evidence. So we take this approach of these 4 questions. I mentioned the paddles, and that's really in grades 3, 4, and 5. Those paddles sort of go away in grade 6. And these questions, history as storyteller, mind reader, that goes away, but we do keep the questions in grades 6, 7, and 8. So the grades that are highlighted in blue there are those that emphasize US history, which was a point that you wanted us to address. And in grade 3, that's really, I mentioned in grades K through 2, we got through the town level of a young learner's world, but here we go to the state level. So our changing land is really the history of Connecticut, or geologic and Native American history of Connecticut, as well as early colonial. Then we go to Connecticut history, and then finally state government. Grade 4 marks a more formal study of US history, and this is at the national level. And this begins with exploration, colonization, the American Revolution. And it continues chronologically in grade 5 with westward expansion, the Civil War era, and industrialization. And in each of these units, we may focus in on a topic, but we examine that topic through the different players in the historical event at the time. And a running theme that's addressed through grades 4 and 5 is a really difficult question: what is freedom? Which is challenging to define. That study of US history continues in grade 8, where we start with a really increasingly abstract and philosophical unit about democracy and what democracy looks like in practice. And then we go through US history periods from the Gilded Age in the 1880s to World War II, obviously in the 1940s. And we trace the application of democracy through those 5 periods. And we do that by with students choosing one of 5 focus groups to look through those historical periods. That's the lens they look through those historical periods through. In grades 6 and 7, those are in gray, and the Connecticut state standards ask that you move to a global emphasis at that point. And in grade 6, we start with a neat food insecurity unit. Our approach to this was really fascinating. We chose modern issues to be informed with historical insights. So with food insecurity, we take a look at food production, and we start with hunter-gatherer, we move to the subsistence farm, and then we get all the way up to the industrial farms of today. And I think that if I recall, as a PBA, the kids have a Socratic seminar in which they debate the merits of industrial farming. In a world of water, we look at the complex issues surrounding water today. Obviously, Flint, Michigan comes to mind, but that unit is informed by a study of the different uses of water and impacts of water on the cultures of the ancient civilizations. Then finally, in grade, the last unit in that period is education, which is informed by a study of imperialism, both in the US and abroad, as well as the assimilation schools in Connecticut around the turn of the 20th century. So at that point, well, not really at that point, you can see in grade 8, they go on to grade 8 with that study of democracy. And it's at that point that we try to hand the baton off to the high school. And the K-8 education is aspiring to hand off students to Daniel Hand, armed with the ability to interpret a wide variety of sources, understand, being able to take a look at or understand multiple perspectives about a topic, and then make informed decisions. And with that in mind, I hand them off to Pete.
Great. You know, one of the things that we ask every teacher that we hire is if you had to sit before the Board of Education and defend a social studies education, which in some ways I feel like I have a chance to do today. You know, what would you say? How would, if they were going to cut the social studies budget, what would you say? And I hope that you leave here tonight with a couple of things. You know, I'm going to address critical race theory in the 1619 project head on because it was kind of veiled through some of the emails that were sent to me. And I'm going to show you where we would discuss them. They're not direct, you know, I'll give you the punchline. They're not directly in our curriculum, but I think we would be remiss at this point not to have an opportunity to discuss them with kids in the context of what we are teaching. So, you know, one of the defenses of social studies is the fact that it is essentially a silver bullet for war, conflict, poverty, famine, disease. And these are the things that we try to get each of our teachers to understand. And if you look at our curriculum, global studies, the electives less so, but US and civics is designed for kids to understand how to take action, how to function in their community and take action. So that was very important to us as we went through the curriculum revision cycle a few years back. So the word chronothematic is kind of like, it reminds me of medicinal therapy. And in the study of history, you can think of it as just that it is that silver bullet for all of our social ills. So that approach in US history really only has 3 major themes bracketed by, and you can go on bracketed by the study of what an era is and how we would define an era. So if you look at 1 and 5, that's the bracket of US history topics. The one that I think you might be most interested in tonight, and you know, I'd be most excited to discuss any questions that you have, is the topic of liberty and equality. Within that, there are several different themes. And the premise is social movement. Their performance-based assessment at the end of that is to champion a cause. That's the title of it, to champion a cause, to understand causes of the past, opportunities for social reform throughout our history, which ones failed, different techniques from gradualism. I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but gradualism, separatism. If you look at violent radical revolt, you know, with the example from John Brown throughout, or Martin Luther King and non-violent protest, which ones fizzled out, which ones were more destructive, and then
did they work together?
Yeah, and then ask them to say, all right, what cause are you passionate about, and what do you think the best approach of handling that is? Because all those different methods have been used throughout our history to different levels of success. But here, okay, so that's liberty and equality. The third one is land of opportunity. You had a couple of economics teachers who thought it was important to take our kids to an economic history of the United States. And so we put that in there because, you know, I think that as the world's leading economic power now, how do we get to that place? So through, you know, post-Civil War, through, you know, the Roaring '20s, those are specific topics, the Great Depression, and then how we came out of World War II. So that was you know, a little personal influence that I had on some of the people who were writing this. And so, but I think it's very valuable. And then finally, foreign policy. And again, these are not related to why I think we're here tonight. So the focus really here would be in this second unit, liberty and equality. And I would like to address that head on if there are any questions. So, you know, slavery and the Dred Scott decision, 1857, Reconstruction, black codes and Jim Crow laws, having kids understand how we went from Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal, to eventually Brown versus Board of Education. And so American public schools have been on the front line of this battle. This isn't the first crack at it. But the question is how we're going to approach it, discuss it, and go about it, and have our kids understand the best way to engage in any movement, not just regarding this, when they come out of that particular unit is important to us, regardless of what side of the topic they may be on. All right, so then civics. So I mentioned civics briefly. Civics is in the context of an action project where, you know, we are teaching them civics and the lessons of civics as they actually take action. They put together a civic action plan, and that has become, you know, that's something that's been somewhat disruptive for a lot of people in the community because there's a lot of work involved and it's asking a lot of community members to do a lot of work. So we've revisited that and to tone it down to a little bit more of a plan, so it's less intrusive to our government officials and our Board of Ed. And the Board of Ed has been involved in a lot of different civic action plans throughout the last couple of years. So I think that's exciting. Are they perfect? They haven't been perfect, but I think the message for the kids is that regardless of their age, you know, by the time they're a junior in high school, they can affect actual change in our communities, and that's an important lesson to learn. All right, so the last thing I would say is this: if you're going through our curriculum and you're seeing certain things that may be questionable to you, you know, I try to instill a mantra in our teachers that what they are doing is meant to be thought-provoking, not thought-policing. We are not telling our kids what to think. We are exposing them to a form of ideas that's designed to get them to think, do quality research, and formulate opinions, debate, and then be armed with knowledge of these topics as they graduate and either go in college careers or take civic action. So, you know, over 95% of our kids go to college, and we want them to have at least heard about these topics so that they aren't embarrassed when confronted with them. So that's that. You know, that's how I'll address it, and then I'm happy to answer any questions. If Chris wants to add anything about U.S. history, he only taught it for 18 years.
Yeah.
So I'm good.
So I have a question and a comment. So I mean, I understand that the purpose of high school education is largely in part to produce good citizens. So civics is a vital thing about that. I think there's a philosophical difference. I think requiring kids to do civil action projects biases them towards activism as opposed to scholarship. That's just my feeling. I think that you can view history in a lot of different lenses, and shouldn't always lead to an activist stance. So I worry a little bit about the balance there. So that's my comment. That's just I'm not foreclosing one. I'm not saying it's not valid to the civic action project. I'm just saying that I'm a little more academically inclined with that. And then my question, Chris, to you is like, I didn't quite get the connection between imperialism and education in the grade 7 state of Connecticut standards.
So one example of that, that's probably 2 weeks of that 6-week unit. And one example, this isn't a perfect match, but the Indian assimilation schools is an example of using the schools as a way of taking away the culture of the Native Americans and impacting their view of themselves and their view of the world. So while the United States treatment of Native American groups isn't usually categorized as imperialism, that would be one example that corresponds to that idea. I wanted to just mention with your comment that I can understand that civics is a half-year course
Yes.
or one
So
trimester.
well, it ends up with one trimester.
Yeah, one
but it's still
trimester.
that's
Yeah.
considered half.
So that was an example where the civic action plan is actually more put into place, but that represents really a fraction of their experience. And I think if we did look at this US history class among the other classes that we offer, I would contend that it's pretty balanced out.
Well, I'm glad you addressed that too, because I think that the taking action or how to take action is something that our curriculum had been completely devoid of. I think it was almost entire. It was the exception. It is actually the exception rather than the rule across all of our electives. So most of it is that. But what about a kid who might want to know how to take action or affect positive change? And so anyway,
I mean, I don't disagree. And as long as it's balanced, and not just in the sense of balance politically, but when you study history, it's a great sin to be anachronistic and to read present day concerns back into the past. And so as long as that message is also getting across, it's fine.
I like the idea.
question of mine.
Greg, were you going to say something?
We can stop share.
Yeah, that was the first thing I was going to say is could you stop sharing because it makes this,
Stop
Oh, there you are.
sharing.
and then we can see who's raising hand. But I first of all thank you, and I'd like to trade this curricular experience for my own K-12 social studies and history curricular experience. So it sounds fantastic. I'm excited for the kids, and I know a lot of work goes into it. I do want to say this, and it's along the lines of what you were raising, Galen. It's interesting that you raised that because I think it's a great thing to discuss and certainly to balance. My high school in particular education was, I think, entirely geared towards scholarship and the academic review of history rather than a more hands-on approach. And I think that it's going to work for some kids and it's not going to work for others. So as long as it's balanced, as long as there's the opportunity to think about how action and knowledge of history go hand in hand, I think it's an important lesson for everyone. I think because the counterbalance on the other end of it is that activism without knowledge of history is maybe just as problematic as those of us who might have just sat in the library and studied only without becoming involved. And that certainly isn't the case of anybody that serves on the Board of Ed. You are involved in history whether you like it or not. But it's just it sounds like it's a good approach to try and engage students from a lot of different students who have different inclinations. That's it. Thanks.
So I want to say a couple of things. First, one of the things that when my daughter went through the K-8 program, that both of us, both her as a student and me as a parent, really liked was in grade 8, how it was very chronological. And you could see the sort of cause and effect, because everyone knows that you can't just take a slice out of history and not understand how what happened here was affected by what happened before and how it affects what happens after. And I thought it was a really good, grade 8 was like such a great use of that to tie everything together. You went through all of the different ages and it made the understanding for her much deeper and she really got it. And I found that in some of the younger grades, it was more separate, kind of piecemeal. And she even said to me once, you know, like, I'm not really understanding where this falls in time. Like, if you had a continuum, like, where does this happen? You know, and so sometimes when you're studying, you know, foreign countries versus the US, you're never really sure what's happening at the same time. So I think personally, I would like to see more of the integration so that they have a deeper understanding that, well, this is happening in the US, this is what's happening over here, and how, you know, the world it affects everyone. So that was the first thing. The other thing that I noticed as a parent with my daughter going through K-8 was that when they were doing social studies and they were told to research things, that their access to research was very limited. They would get a cart and it would have a set of books that was pre-selected for them. And my daughter felt like mostly one perspective was more heavily weighed than another. And sometimes they were asked to choose, you know, choose this side, and then, you know, support your argument. And even when they were given the opportunity to look on the internet and do online research, they were told, with good reasons, certain websites, you know, you can only go to these because they are pre-selected for obvious reasons. But also, they also had a certain perspective that was sort of leaning one way as opposed to the other. And so I found it very unbalanced. And so I think that that could be looked at and improved.
One area, I understand what you're saying. We want, I teach grade 8, so I can speak directly to that now. And just a few months ago, or weeks ago for that matter, now the kids are going to the library and perusing whatever the contents of the library is. So I would suspect, you know, we were pulling every book we possibly could from the library. So if you were feeling that that was from one perspective, it would really be a library issue, but we could help inform them about that. But also our library has subscriptions to like US History and Context database, as well as Biography and Context that we use. So we use 2 databases. We also have access to Newsella, which has different articles at different levels.
Yeah, I've seen Newsella.
Yeah.
I'm actually not a big fan of Newsella. I find that I understand why they pick and choose for the lower grades, you know, for content, so that it's more understandable for that
Yeah.
grade. However, when you pick and choose a lot, it changes context, I think. And again, I found that it leans towards one opinion more than the other. And I found
Yeah, I
Newsella was
think
very much that way.
before I get to that point, one other example of a resource that we have the kids using is Upfront magazine and Junior Scholastic. Those tend to be the most balanced. I would contend that while I hear that you're mentioning Newsella with the articles having one perspective, I could agree with that, but we're trying to have the kids identify that perspective and recognize that perspective, know it's a perspective, and it's not the only perspective. I think that when, you know, I think textbooks are sort of boring because they never have a perspective, or their perspective is written as fact.
No, they're boring.
So we try to have fun with the perspectives as best we can. I do agree, like I taught high school for a lot of years, and now I'm working with the middle schoolers, and it is a real challenge to get them to understand that. So I'm on board with you, and it's a struggle, but that's our job.
I think there was also an availability of various parts of literature that would support balanced perspectives and younger ages. We did a lot of research, I think, very much in that realm and in some of the units that you were working on. And the resources were pretty limited. So I do think they have evolved. We do also, now that we have access, all kids have access, which is great. We're able to use some websites such as All Sides that create a platform to see both perspectives of current issues. So
That's one of our
the-
newest ones. I love the internet, but a lot of parents, and I think the philosophy of the school is just right through K-8, we're not really just letting them loose on the internet. I think in the high school, it's a different situation. So we definitely try to curate the resources available to them. How old is your daughter?
She's in high school now.
Right,
She's a
so,
freshman.
yeah, so it was just last year. So some of these things that I mentioned are the result of the digitalization of our curriculum. So that's pretty neat. Like, we didn't have the carts of books this year because of COVID.
Right.
So that's interesting how that prompted some of this.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing, and I know that, most of people's research is done on the internet now, but I felt also that they lacked sort of the ability to be able to go into the library and find what they needed. I wanted them to do more of an independent research of go in and this is what I'm looking for,
Yeah.
and I have to find it myself. It's not going to be spoon fed to me, and that's what I was looking for. So
It is a process. Like, I totally agree with you, and we're refining our practice every year. I mentioned some of the changes, and that's important. We just had the kids complete an annotated bibliography where they selected their 8 resources. They sometimes use more, and they had to explain why that source was valuable to their research. And then of course, they would use that source. So I feel that we hear you, and we are definitely refining our practice in that direction.
Kathy had her hand up. She's been so
Oh,
patient.
sorry, Kathy.
No.
Go ahead.
Hi, first of all, I want to say thank you for putting together this information for us tonight. I know how much work this takes and all of the work that you put behind the scenes. So I really appreciate you coming tonight to talk to us. It's interesting. I'm going to kind of dovetail what Diane just kind of, the conversation that just led to about books. I wondered, and this is where the Board of Ed can really be supportive in this work. How have we addressed in our libraries and our classroom libraries and that sort of thing? And I do see, from my own daughters bringing home from their English classes, books around more diverse topics, but has there been enough attention paid to refreshing our library in a way that brings those books that have maybe the other side of a story in history, or another version that might not be in the textbook that we've purchased? Is there a way that we can somehow bolster all of our libraries, starting in kindergarten all the way up to 12, in a way that gives all of our students access to the stories of our history that may not be told in those textbooks?
Are you implying that our libraries are biased right now?
I don't know, am I? No, I'm saying that I think all across our nation, this is a topic, as a literacy coach. Pardon me?
But we're talking about Madison.
Yeah,
So
yes.
do our libraries contain a diverse?
I'm asking,
approaches or not?
that's my question. Do
But you're
you
implying-
feel,
But you're implying that they don't? But you're implying that they don't?
I'm asking if you think that they are diverse enough, and if not, how can we help with that? How can we put some more? I mean, if what Diana's saying is that her daughter wasn't getting, there weren't enough books on that cart to support some other perspectives, then I don't think I'm alone in saying that. I
Yeah, I
think it's already been brought
If
up.
I'm hearing you correctly, Kathy, you're wondering if it's a resourcing kind of issue. Is it
Yeah.
a funding issue?
Yes, yeah,
I think that all of the coaches would agree, and Chris and Pete would agree. If there's something that comes up that they need, then I make sure they have it. And that's a priority. In terms of refreshing and keeping up on new publishings that are coming out, I look to my coordinators to kind of be the ears on the ground on that. It's always important to make a purposeful query on certain topics. And I think there were some topics that we were like, it's a little short on this perspective or that perspective. But in terms of creating classroom libraries that have a place for kids to recognize themselves and to grow empathy for others, I think that that's been a consistent focus that we've had ever since we started developing classroom libraries.
I also wanted to mention that since I've gone to K-8, it's been really brutal to try to find age-appropriate resources for some very complex topics in social studies. So that was one reason why I appreciated Newsella, because it would adjust the reading level, and we desperately need that. So yeah, like sometimes it's a question of, are the resources even out there? And I know that I work with Dawn and Paige, and I'll tell you, like, they're on a mission to find resources for us, and they work very closely with the social studies department. And quite honestly, I rely on them to be my eyes and ears with what's coming out and what's new.
sure.
Sometimes also what you're mentioning, like, it's hard for us to respond in real time. Like, sometimes I think what you might be getting at is something that's just been put on the table in the last 16 months. And, you know, for a library to respond like on the fly like that, it takes budget cycles and it takes publishing cycles and so forth. But I feel, as Pete was mentioning earlier, that our hearts are certainly in the right place. And, you know, we're starving for resources. Not because the district doesn't provide them, but we're searching for the right ones to get.
Yeah, and I think that's my point is, you know, are there think tanks of people and do you feel like you need more, you know, thinking ahead for next year's budget and that type of thing, you know, is there as like you were saying, you know, in the lower grades, it doesn't have to be something that the kids can lift the print. And even in the higher grades, it could be a read aloud or articles that the teacher can read to the children and have discussion about. So,
well, we use children's literature a lot, which is a lot of fun. And it's fascinating how they use that. Another question just is like with your daughter's case, you know, we have really in grade 8, like 160 kids doing this same project. So we definitely don't have like just copious amounts of material for that many kids. Sometimes those books might have been in another classroom or taken out by other students. And I'm not saying like we can't improve, we certainly can, but it's a lot of kids. And I can't even imagine at the high school, the numbers there have got to be challenging as well.
Yeah.
So
I'll say that there's a lot of choice. So we don't really have that same problem where they're all on the same topic. They're branching out to, because they are afforded a lot of choice. But I'll say this in the past. So I don't know if I want to bring this topic up tonight, but it's something maybe we can think about, you know, for another meeting. I've been doing that a lot lately. There's been a little bit of turmoil at the high school. I mean, we've had maybe 4 different librarians in 5 or 6 years. We used to take the library media center specialist used to take our freshmen and teach a class on how to find good resources. You know, and we would do classes on how do you identify bias and how, you know, and making value judgments about different forms of material. That in itself is a great lesson, right? Regardless of the outcome of what the objective was. And those were with research papers. So, so we're in the middle of a difficult time to answer your question is all I'm saying. Especially since even taking them down this year. But we have a great person who is an heir of calm now, and she's the coordinator.
Yeah.
So we have the boss now at hand. So I do think in the next 18 to 24 months, you're going to see
That's great.
your kids will be down there more actively, without masks too, perhaps. So.
And truly, we did for this year. We did hit our print collection for some other priorities in the district. So I would agree. John has approached me with a wish list for the library that I'm hopeful that we'll be able to fund more successfully next year.
And please know, my question is not a criticism at all. It's just, I want to know how we can support you as a Board of Ed, and how going forward, those are things that that we might be able to support you with. So that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, totally. That was clear.
Yeah. My other question is back to the kindergarten. When you shared what the kindergarten or they start out with my classroom, my school, my town, and how and the conversations are around like, who am I and who are my classmates, that type of thing. Am I correct?
Yeah.
I was like, so my question is, what happens if there isn't a lot of diversity within that classroom? Will the students who aren't maybe represented within that classroom, will there be ways for us to address how this group of people that is in my classroom isn't it? Like, there is so much more diversity than just what's sitting next to me on my left and on my right.
Yeah, again, I think through literature, Kathy, we have a lot of great books that we can pull from and do pull from to be more representative of a more global picture than the picture of my classroom.
Yeah. And, as I was thinking, when you got to grade 8, you were talking about what is freedom, and that's when they start to talk about that. And I'm wondering, what if that started in kindergarten? What if that conversation was like an overarching type of conversation that started earlier? When you talked about passing the baton from grade 8 to high school, sometimes those core beliefs and values, they're already internalized, and sometimes they're passed on from generation to generation, and our opportunity to really help shape the thinking of our citizens, our global citizens, but our classroom citizens, our school citizens, and the citizens of Madison, is to start early with questions like, what is freedom, and who are my neighbors on either side of my town or within my town that might not be represented in my classroom. So I just wondered if that was something that
I don't mean to cut you off, but I think if we have a lot more questions, that we should schedule like another meeting, because I know we have something else on the agenda, and I don't want to cut that short either.
Yeah, I have a bunch more questions, so that would be great.
I also have a few more.
Yeah.
So
Come back.
I'll give you one.
That's great.
One to have you come back and get more questions like together ready.
Absolutely. Could we hear Greg?
Yeah. Okay. Can you talk really fast?
Yeah, I can just say my questions, and one of them's really just an idea for another meeting. First, well, I guess 3 things. 1, curriculum meetings need to be more than an hour. 2, I can't recall, and I probably haven't been on curriculum and student development long enough, but whether we've ever heard from the librarians, just in general, about how they approach some of the things that have sort of bubbled up tonight. And that might be an interesting topic. It might even, dare I say, be an interesting forum topic, because that seems like a real community question of how do we get together materials that all of our students see, and especially when you move out of the classroom libraries and into Pulse and Hand, that's of interest. Here's my question, and you don't have to answer it right now, but I'd love to hear more about it. It's sort of whether we think students are universally prepared our graduates at hand, are they universally prepared for, and this is a cross-disciplinary question, I know, academic writing, kind of building off of some of the things that folks have asked. Are they prepared for that sort of college level of writing where they are, building an argument and citing and putting their perspective on things that are based in fact? How, and I guess my question is really, how do you know? How do we know that students are prepared for that? It's just another question of interest for me that we totally don't have time for. So just throwing it out there.
I think we're gonna have to get more questions together. I know there's
That's a
more that we
teaser
want to.
to throw out a
We do.
question.
I just have one more question that I really, it's been bothering me since I found out, and I have to know the answer to it. I'm sorry, but I'm gonna go ahead and ask it. When we met at our retreat, we talked about there was a class offered to the students on race, and Craig, you might remember the title of the class. Do you remember?
Yeah, African American history and Latinx.
Yeah.
Is it that
It's
one or is
English,
it,
the English class.
it's race, culture, and literature?
Yeah, race,
Is that what you're referring to, or the
It's
state
it's
mandated?
it's the one that not one student signed up for.
Oh, it's,
Anybody know why?
Yeah, I think we discussed that at the other board meeting. I think it had more to do with the fact it was a single trimester course and fitting it into the schedules when
Okay.
there were
missed-
a lot of,
The level, right?
yeah, and the level
level
that it
too.
was. Because of the way that the credits are counted with the AP courses and so there's a lot going on there. It's not content so much as it is the level and the credits that it's worth and squeezing in a single semester class.
I think
So
that
just
would be a
maybe,
good topic to keep on the queue as well.
yes,
I think that'd be-
I would love to see maybe it be worth more, that it would become something that's important enough for kids to sign up for.
Correct. Right. Okay. Put that on the list.
Thank you so much.
Kathy.
We'll have you back.
Yeah, we'll see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Becky, you want to come up?
July 7th is our next meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, your fault. And on that slide,
This has been a good topic.
it was a good topic.
Yes.
Right, I like it. You're talking really fast.
Yeah, right? Okay. So let me,
Screen sharing.
Okay.
Can you guys see that?
There we go. You see it okay? Yep, okay. I'd like to welcome Becky Frost to our committee. Becky has been chairing the whole child wellness team for quite a few years now. Definitely had a little break while she had a baby, but back on track. We wanted to give you an update about some of the work that the whole child wellness team has been involved in this year. We do have some accomplishments that we wanted to highlight. And those accomplishments include training that all of our Polson and Daniel Hand staff went through in suicide prevention, ongoing partnership with Madison Youth and Family Services. And then we've also incorporated some practices into the high school called Wellness Wednesday that have been very well received. And we also have had a very active subcommittee that's continued to work throughout the pandemic on some of the past work that we brought forth. So that work of the subcommittee had really started several years ago, where we started examining various universal screens for social emotional well-being. And that subcommittee took a hard look at various products that were out on the market, some of the districts that were implementing universal screens successfully. But we also heard from the State Department last summer that they were pursuing an RFP for a universal screen. And that RFP was going to be awarded in November of last year. And of course, the RFP ran late. It was just awarded, and we want to bring you up to speed on what that looks like. And I'm flying by it, sorry, this is quick. So the State Department selected Aperture Education, which was actually one of the universal screens that was in high regard from our subcommittee. It involves all K through 12 students and a universal screening process that's very similar to our academic screening process. It does include all aspects of universal screen, including progress monitoring, reporting, as well as resources for growth and learning. I'm going to turn it over to Becky to talk a little bit more about those screens.
Sure. So the idea of a universal screen for our students' social emotional learning, again, is something that we have been talking about as a committee for several years. So the fact that we are now moving forward with this, an assessment that we are really excited about. In fact, it was when we were doing research, this was an assessment that my team was very interested in and wanted to use with our students. So we're very excited that this year we will be completing universal screens using something called the DESA Mini. It is very quick at the K-8 level. It is an 8-question screener, and you can see the questions right here. It will take teachers about 1 minute to complete for each of their students. So at the K-8 level, it's teacher completed. And it will basically be able to tell us, much like a reading screener or a math screener, you know, who's kind of flagging or who's kind of coming up as maybe being at risk for needing some extra support with this. So approximately 3 times a year, we will give this screener. We would meet then as SST teams to talk about the students that flag. Again, it is just that, it's a flag. So it doesn't mean that we need to call up the troops for a certain student, but it means we need to have a conversation. It means we need to have more information and look at all of the data we have about a child. The very cool thing about the DESA Mini is that it is directly linked to the full DESA assessment. So if a child flags on the DESA Mini and we as a team decide, yeah, there could be something going on with this child, we're then going to refer them to one of our mental health team specialists to complete, potentially as a next step, the full DESA, which is 72 questions. So that will really get more in depth on what specific area a student is struggling in. The DESA is also really going to be helpful in having us use the data to inform our decision-making processes. We will be able to progress monitor students. We will be able to have reports sort of at our fingertips. As a principal, I'll be able to drill down from an individual to a class to my school, and even we'll be able to pull up information on the district. So really usable data, which we're excited about. And then lastly, data's, it's great if you have pretty charts and everything, but we want to be able to use that data to help students grow. So the last thing that I'd like to talk about and why the DESA is going to be really useful for us is that, let's say a student flags in an area of self-awareness. At their fingertips, the teachers, school counselors, social workers are going to have multi-tier strategies and lessons ready to go. So they can pull self-awareness category. They'll get lessons that are based either for a whole group, for a teacher to use, a whole class, small group, maybe for a counselor to use, and even one-on-one lessons that maybe a social worker would be using with a child. So it's all of those strategies together and all of those pieces that really, we see the DESA as a complete package, and we're excited to get started with it this year.
So it is an application process. I did fill out a lengthy application from the State Department to be a part of the original team that is using the DESA. There is a high school edition that is a self-report as well that students in high school would take. And that comes out with a plethora of personalized strategies that students have in a gamified system. So we have not seen that up close and personal, nor have we been able to get trained thus far, but we have applied for cohort 2, and that starts us in our training sequence right away in the fall in October. And in November, we have a district team that's been established as well as school-based teams in every building. The new social workers would be part of those teams. We would complete our training for a supposed launch of the first universal screening application in February of next year. So we are aggressively seeking the ability to be able to use this tool. We were invited to a conference right away as soon as the application went in, and intended parts of that, but we have a lot of training that we still need to complete before we can administer. So that our next level of work is right there. And we also have trauma-informed training coming across the district. Again, recommended by the Full Child Wellness Team. Joanne Freiberg is the person who the team recommended and selected, also based on our committee that oversees professional development in the district. So how did I do?
That was good.
Pretty quick, right?
That was very good, both of you.
We're well-oiled.
Yeah, we can do that.
Does anyone from the committee have any questions? So just the high school
Great,
part,
I hope we get it.
just the high school part is the one that cannot be implemented yet, or the whole program?
The
cannot?
whole program, we
Okay.
need the complete training before we do any parts of it.
Okay.
So the application's in, we're just waiting to hear.
When do we expect to hear?
I thought maybe last week, but I didn't hear.
So, any day now.
now.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's a certain number of districts that are accepted into cohort 2, so I'm sure they're getting all their applications in, and I think it was early in the applying end. So the window is still open for quite some time.
Okay, so you'll get back to us.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, that's a wrap. Does anyone have any other questions from the committee? Any public comment? Is there anybody? I don't know, can Wendy tell? Wendy, is there anyone in the public that wants to comment?
There's no one.
There's no attendees.
All right. Then can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you. I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned at 6:35.
What?
Thank you,
Okay.
everybody.